We're waking up to extraordinary news from the Middle East this morning. Rebel forces in Syria have reached the capital, and the Assad regime has fallen. Gunfire and chants of freedom in central Damascus as residents take to the streets in celebration. Syrian rebel forces say President Bashar al-Assad has fled the country. The Prime Minister says he's ready to hand over the government to the opposition. We'll get immediate reaction from the government here to those extraordinary events in Syria from the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. And from the opposition, we'll be joined by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel. We'll speak to NATO Foreign Minister from Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, and the former head of MI6 who's worked in Syria, Sir John Soares. Plus, with us throughout the show, Director of Audio at the Telegraph, Kamal Ahmed, Economist Linda Yueh, and columnist and former number 10 speechwriter Philip Collins. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. It'll be a slightly different programme this morning as we focus on that breaking news from Syria overnight, where rebels say they've captured the capital Damascus and President Assad is thought to have fled the country. Let's start by getting the very latest from the region. I can speak now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Good morning, Ali. Is it all over for Assad?
Yes, it is. His location right now is unknown. We're told that he has left Damascus, but no confirmation that he has actually left Syria itself. It is possible that he has gone to the Latakia region. That is the region where his father, Hafez, grew up. It is a regime stronghold, but also there's a possibility that he might have fled to an allied country, to Moscow or to Tehran. So his location unknown, but confirmation that he has left the Syrian capital, Damascus. And we are seeing now celebrations on the streets of the city and across Syria. There is a feeling of euphoria and jubilation after the collapse of 54 years of Assad dynasty rule, 54 years of murderous, brutal crackdown on any opposition within the country. And yet it has been the opposition that has risen up against Assad over the past few days and has moved through the major urban areas of Syria with lightning speed that has surprised everybody. And they have done it really without facing much of a fight. There was concerns that when they reached Damascus, that would be Assad's final stand, that troops loyal to him would put up a fight, that it would become bloody. But that didn't happen. His troops faded away. We've got pictures of some of them changing their clothes out of their military fatigues and into civilian clothing to blend into the local population. His two major backers, Russia and Iran, decided not to prop him up this time. They've got their own issues to deal with. And so he was left isolated with no real options, and he has fled. His rule is over, but what comes next is the major question.
Well, indeed. We know a little bit about the main opposition force, so there's more than one, HTS. But what can you tell us about what to expect from them?
Well, I think it's important to note that Syria is divided many ways, geographically and socially. The euphoria that we're seeing at the moment is entirely to be expected and entirely understandable after what Syrians have lived through for so many decades. But at some point in the coming days, that will give way, perhaps, to feelings of hatred and anger because of what they've lived through, and containing that anger and making sure that that anger isn't directed at former regime loyalists in a violent way. Well, that will be hard to try and control. But Syria is also divided geographically. It is not the opposition against the regime. There are many rebel groups around Syria that control different parts of the country, all a result of the uprisings in 2011. And these rebel groups have combined and coordinated to some degree in order to achieve this success. But who then governs Syria, who takes power, is the next unknown. And I think we could expect that a lot of them want their own slice of that power. So will they be able to coordinate it in an orderly fashion? There are some positive signs that I think we need to cling on to in the early stages. There seems to have been a link between Syria's prime minister, who remains in Damascus, and HTS, the main rebel group, in the last couple of days. He has been taken to a five-star hotel and he said he will oversee an orderly transition of power. What role he has to play, we'll have to see. But it doesn't look as though there is a desire at the moment for revenge, but how they shape a future government is going to be very difficult indeed.
Ali, thank you so much. I know we'll be hearing from you pretty much all through the day, maybe in this programme, depending on what happens. Let's get some immediate reaction from the government here. A little earlier this morning, I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner, what can you tell us about the situation in Syria this morning?
Well, the situation looks very serious, and if Assad regime has fallen, then I welcome that news. But what we need to see is a political resolution in line with the UN resolutions, and we need to see civilians and infrastructure protected. Far too many people have lost their lives. We need stability in that region.
I'm interested in what you said about welcoming news, but before we do that, before I ask you about that, what do we know about British citizens in there? The number, their safety, anything that we should know about?
Well, the Foreign Secretary and obviously our Foreign Office are working. You'll have heard last week the Foreign Secretary was very clear about UK civilians leaving Syria. We've had a plan to ensure that people were evacuated ahead of what's happened over the weekend, and we continue to support our UK nationals. OK.
Well, you've been pretty clear you're glad to see the back of Assad, but how concerned are you about what might happen next?
Well, this is why we want to see the UN resolution implemented and a political solution. Syrians deserve to live in peace and safety, and that's what we want to see implemented. So civilians must be protected, and of course the infrastructure that is so desperately needed as well.
Well, of course, one of the reasons that we are always concerned about this is that the results land up on our shore. There are millions of refugees who've already left Syria, and some of them turn up in Europe, some turn up here. Have you any concerns about that? And what would we do if Syrian refugees start turning up here?
Well, as I said, if Assad has fallen and that regime is over, I welcome that. He wasn't exactly good to the Syrian people. So we want to see a political resolution so that we can get that stability for Syrians and make sure that they have the infrastructure so that they have a political government there that is working in the interests of the Syrian people. That's what we need long-term for the area, and that hopefully working with our allies in the UN will be able to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, but nobody can predict what's going to happen. But of course, we've in some senses been here before, and there is a, let's call it a frying pan and fire situation here. At least one of the forces that are entering Damascus used to be an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Is there a danger here that we're exchanging at least a stable, unpleasant regime for something worse?
Well, that's why we've got to keep pushing with our UN resolution and our allies to make sure that, look, dictatorship and terrorism creates problems for the people of Syria who have faced so much already, and also destabilises the region. That's why we have to have a political solution where the government is acting in the interests of the Syrian people. That's what we want to see. That's the type of democracy that we say is right for the world, and that hopefully is what the Syrian people will get. If Assad has gone, that's a welcome change, but what comes next has to be a political solution, and they have to be working in the interests of the Syrian people.
How optimistic are you that, unlike some other situations where it's led to instability, I'm thinking, for example, Libya, that this might be an opportunity for something new in the region?
Well, as I said, Assad wasn't exactly good for the Syrian people. Let's hope that working with the UN, working with our allies, we can get a government in Syria that is working in the interests of the Syrian people, and we can show that democracy does work and that people of Syria deserve to feel safe and have the basic services and liberties that people like ourselves have.
And if the new regime, whatever it is, appeals to us for help with refugees, with support and so forth, we're going to be open to that, are we?
Well, the Foreign Secretary will be... the Prime Minister is in the region over the next couple of days, and the Foreign Secretary will continue to work with our allies and make sure that we do, as we always do, support people across the world.
All right, let's turn to some domestic issues. And I want to focus on understanding how you plan to give effect to the Prime Minister's 6 milestones. And by the way, just to save you the trouble of repeating them all, we're going to put them up graphically during the interview, so you don't have to tell me what they all are. Viewers will be seeing them all.
There's mine, 1.5 million new homes. There you go, that's mine.
I'm so happy you want to talk about that. That milestone has not been achieved since 1972. Yeah. And since that year, there have been 28 predecessors in your job, including 2 Deputy Prime Ministers, Heseltine and Prescott. They all failed. What are you going to do that they didn't?
Well, just to contextualise it even more, Trevor, is that to ramp it up to the rate that I need to meet that target, we haven't seen house building like that since the 1950s, after the Second World War. So it is a stretch target.
I think that was Mr Macmillan was the last time.
Absolutely. But look, this is why the Prime Minister says we're going to make sure that we streamline planning. I'm coming forward this next week with our National Planning Policy Framework, which I consulted on, which is going to be tough and put clarity in the planning system. I've told local authorities they have to have a local plan. That means councillors and local people will decide what the general plan is for their area, and then I'm going to streamline planning. We just can't carry on like this. You know, we're not getting the development we need, we're not getting the houses we need. We've got 8 times average income for first-time buyers. People are priced out of getting a home, and I'm determined to change it. And Trevor, I've been underestimated quite a lot in my life, and I wouldn't allow the Prime Minister to put that target up there if I didn't think I could meet it. And I'm determined to do it, because having a home is not just about a home, it's about security, it's about a job, it's about raising a family, and far too many people now can't do that.
There is never going to be any underestimation of Angela Rayner in this studio. So let's just start from this point. If we are talking in 4 years' time, can you guarantee you're going to be able to say, Trevor, done it?
I'm determined to make sure by the end of this Parliament that I meet that target. I hate failure, Trevor, and that target is my target, so I've got to deliver it. But it does mean that we're going to have to make real changes to the planning system. Yep. We've already put £5 billion next year into additional funding into housing, £500 million into affordable homes. There has to be lots of different parts of the system that works, and that includes, and I want to reassure people listening to this, infrastructure.
Well, I want to come to all that. Let's come to all that. And let's just deal with this lovely word that you've just used, streamlining.
Yes.
I see the Prime Minister this morning is saying that local councils will get more powers, but they will also have more responsibilities, and they are basically not to stand in the way. Does that streamlining mean that local councils are going to be more powerful as long as they do what you tell them?
Well, kind of, in a way, yes. But it'll be part of a consultation with them. So, first of all, our national planning...
you're not going to consult... If you're telling them today, it's perfectly reasonable, you're the boss. If you're telling them today, we're consulting you, but at the end of the day, you're going to do what we tell you. That's a clear message from Angela Rayner.
So let me say it simply. I consulted on the National Planning Policy Framework from July when we were elected. Next week, I will be outlining that structure. So it'll be clarity from the centre. Mandatory targets for local councils mean they have to have a local plan, and that will be developed with local people. So therefore, the planning nationally with the local plan means that we all know what the strategy is, we all know where the development is going to be. There is no need then for things to be constantly clogged up in a system that is causing chaos. So people know where we're going and they know the destination, they've inputted into that process, and then we're going to deliver the homes we need.
Look, I get the rhetoric, but in the end, what happens when they say, OK, Angela, we love it, we love the plan, but you know what? We cannot build this number of houses in this place because we won't have it. Well, are you going to tell them you're going to do it?
They've got mandatory housing targets, so they're going to develop a local plan. The system
but what happens if they don't hit the plan? What are you going to do?
Let me be clear. The system at the moment that we inherited, because the Conservatives took away local housing targets and mandatory plans, means that we have speculative development at the moment where they can get permitted development rights and go onto the green belt, build houses that people in the local area didn't want. This will be an engagement and a plan that has been agreed.
Look, I know you're going to
we can take it forward.
I love all the diplomacy, but let's get down to the point where you say, your borough council's Tameside, you say to Tameside, who, by the way, have got a very efficient process, Tameside says to you, yeah, but we can't put 100 homes there. We're just not going to do it. And you say, I do want you to put them there. Who wins? Will you just instruct them?
So, me as Housing Secretary sets out a national framework. Then local Tameside puts a local plan together that says, here's our brownfield sites, here's where we can build houses.
But you're not
and then developers say, this is where we want to build. And if they are building within the local plan and the MPPF, they will get a fast-track process. If they say, actually, I don't want, a developer says, I'm not following your local plan, I'm not following the MPPF, it has to then have to have consultation.
I am asking you, what happens if they say to you, we do not agree with you? Does your new streamlining mean that you're going to say to them, yeah, you might not agree, but you're going to do it anyway? And if you don't do it, what are the sanctions?
Trevor, they have to have a local plan. It's compulsory.
I'm not talking about the local plan. There's actual decisions.
Yeah, of course, you're missing the point.
And they don't hit the plan. What happens if they don't hit the plan?
Well, you're missing the point. So they have to...
I don't think so.
No, they have to have... that it's compulsory under our new MPPF for them to have a local plan. So councillors and councils will identify areas for development,
I'm not asking
and
about
then
the
it goes
plan.
forward.
I'm not talking about intention. I'm talking about your boss's favourite word, delivery. If they say they cannot deliver this or will not deliver it, what are you going to do?
They have to compulsory have the plan.
But what happens if they say, no, I'm not going to do it? What are you going to do?
Well, ultimately, if they don't have a local plan, then we will have to look at delivery. But they will have a local plan because they know that that's what they need to do. Councils are going to say, we have to have a local plan, we will deliver a local plan.
They can have as many plans as you like. OK, but what I'm hearing is that there'll be councils who will stand in your way. But let's deal with some of the actual... objectives you've got. You do know, by the way, you're saying 1.5 million homes.
Yes.
Is this incredibly ambitious? Have a look at this graphic. You can see here that actually, if you hit your target, you're only going to deliver an extra 9 homes per 1,000 people. Not very much, is it?
Well, as we said before, Trevor, we haven't seen house building on this scale since the 1950s after the Second World War. It is an incredibly ambitious programme, but we're determined to deliver it. That's around planning reform, so we get these systems up and running quicker. Many developments are always stuck and clogged in the planning system. We have to have the infrastructure alongside that. That's why we're focusing ministers and our planning reforms later this year into making sure that national infrastructure is part of that programme. And we're making sure we're injecting more money into the Affordable Homes Programme and house building. Well,
look, let me see if I can be helpful here. It would speed things up if some of the reasons for objections were removed. For example, in your own borough, housing developments have been stopped on the grounds that they're shading somebody else's land, or that they don't quite fit in with the local ambience and so on. Are you going to take out some of the conditions by which people can object and stop development?
Yes. And that's why we're coming forward next week with the national plan.
Give me a couple of examples. Oh, great! Give me a couple of examples of things that aren't going to be.
So we're clarifying.
Aren't going to be reasons to object.
So we're clarifying the national planning policy framework, which you'll see next week, which has clear guidance, which will mean that if they meet the environmental standards, don't worry, they still have to be beautiful, and that's all still in there. But actually, it's about unblocking some of the subjective reasons as to why planning doesn't go ahead.
This is really interesting. So, for example, this is on big projects, but housing. Sir John Ahmed, the boss of the National Infrastructure Commission, pointed out that there are a whole bunch of projects that were stopped because of the protection of the black-legged kittiwake. So, under Angela Rayner, the black-legged kittiwake now needs to look to its future because it's not going to stop housing.
Well, environmental factors will be taken into account, but we can't have a situation where we have a desperate housing crisis and we can't resolve things like nutrient neutrality, which we believe we can, and making sure that we can make sure that nature's protected, but we can't have a situation where we can't build those houses. So there's mitigations you can make, but I cannot accept the situation as it stands currently. So
seriously, some of these regulations are going to go, as far as you're concerned. They've got to go.
They will be clarity to ensure that we don't see buildings stalled for years and years. And you will see that next week. We are being very punchy about it because we will build the homes that we desperately need.
You say you're being punchy, but this is not very Angela Rayner. Why can't you just say, look, guys, the newts, the black-legged kittiwakes, the bats, you're going to have to take second place to getting houses for people.
Well, I believe we can offset, look after them, but at the same time not stop building.
All right.
Because we can't have a situation where a newt's more protected than people who desperately need housing. What we need is a process which says protect the nature and wildlife, but not at the expense of us building the houses we need. We could do both.
All right, let me ask you about another element of this. On the present densities, you're going to add 3.4 million... or homes for 3.4 million people with your 1.5 million houses. On your own figures, we're also going to add to our population 2.5 million people over this same period. Are you content that more than 5 out of 7 new homes will go to immigrants?
Well, that's not the truth, and that's not the case.
That's what will happen?
Well, that's not the reality, because
where the 2.5 million immigrants that are in Rachel Reeves' budget figures going to turn up? Where are they going to live?
Well, there's plenty of housing in the UK, but the houses, especially social
hang on. You can't, on the one hand, say we've got to build this 1.5 million houses and then say there's plenty of housing already.
There is plenty of housing, Trevor, already, but there's not enough for the people that desperately need it. So the homes, especially under our affordable homes programme, which is social and affordable housing, they will be there for people who desperately need them, local people. We've already outlined how we're going to support veterans and people who are fleeing domestic violence. Councils need homes for people that are on the waiting list. I've already announced changes to the right to buy, making sure they have
this doesn't quite make sense.
So that we can deliver the houses they desperately need.
Deputy Prime Minister, it doesn't quite make sense. You start the interview by telling me that there's a housing crisis. When I remind you that you have said yourselves as a government, we're going to need 2.5 million migrants. Some of them, by the way, people are going to build the houses. Suddenly, there's a lot of housing. Where are these people going to go?
Well, Trevor, first of all, when you say about building as well, the previous government did use migrant labour far too much instead of actually building skills here in the UK. I've announced £140 million for new construction hubs so that we can train people here to deliver those housing. So I don't accept that we're going to bring migrants in for that. We've always said that actually we need to skill our own people up. But equally, we need to build the homes that people need. Nobody's had a focus on social housing for a generation, and I'm going to build those homes because far too many people at the moment are waiting on council housing lists, and I've got to fix that.
I really wish we had more time. Come back and talk more about it when you've started building some houses. Angela,
I will.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
To our panel now, we're joined all morning by Director of Audio at the Telegraph, Kamal Ahmed, columnist and former number 10 speechwriter Philip Collins, and economist Linda Yueh. Kamal, you've probably been in Damascus more recently than any of us.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I haven't been there at all.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of it?
I think the first thing to say is let's be optimistic. I mean, we know that since 9/11, with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with Libya, we've had optimism, and then that optimism has been dashed. Now, Syria is a fascinating country that has constantly flirted with a liberal future. As you say, I was there in the back end of 2009, 2010. And at that time, Assad was going through one of his periodic, let's be more liberal. And I went on a petrochemicals visit, and they were building all these new oil refineries. They were looking at education just before the Arab Spring. And you went with a sense of optimism. Within 2 years, they were in civil war. And the issue for Syria, as with so many Middle Eastern states, but also, my family is Sudanese, what is happening in Sudan at the moment, that optimism of the people is dashed by the inability of the leadership. And just as Ali was saying earlier, the problem now is, what is the leadership going to look like for Syria?
Linda, what do you think? What are you seeing?
No, I'd agree. I think we need to be optimistic, but history tells us there's a lot of challenges in that region. We've seen it since the Arab Spring in 2011, and I think the misery of Syria throughout this period. I think this is why we must hope that, listening to the Deputy Prime Minister, that Britain will work with the UN and with others in the region to try and restore peace, if not stability. And I think we have to start with this, even though I know we are all extremely worried because, as we know, there's different factions and oppositions, and HTS, the leader of whom I believe is actually, there's a bounty on his head from the United States. Wow. So this is quite a volatile situation, but this is a good starting point, I think, Trevor.
Phil, you've been, when you were Number 10, you've been in the middle of all this sort of... What are they doing this morning in Number 10? What's the... People running around tearing their hair out, but what's a drill?
Well, they're doing rather what we're doing, though hopefully with rather more information at their fingertips and trying to work out what comes next and what, if anything, the role for the UK can be. Because I never thought I'd ever be thinking that I can't unequivocally welcome the demise of somebody as brutal as Assad. But the question you asked, Alistair Bunkle, is the pertinent one, which is, well, what happens next? And the character of HTS is disputed. I mean, it began as an affiliate of al-Qaeda. And Henry Kissinger's famous remark comes to mind about the Iran-Iraq war. It's a shame that both sides can't lose, because I'm not sure I'm convinced by the transformation of HTS into some other group. So the shape of the opposition forces now is the pivotal question. It's far too early for anybody to say how that will work through, but it could be a very worrying power vacuum into all sorts of things.
Well, the most striking thing perhaps about this situation is essentially what's not there, which is Russian backing and Iranian intervention. Where have they gone?
Well, the issue obviously has been that Russia is totally focused on Ukraine. With Trump coming in, Russia wants to get as much land as it can in Ukraine assured before Trump demands peace, some kind of peace deal. Iran has clearly been very badly damaged by the attacks by Israel. Hezbollah, its proxy, has been, lots of its leadership have been killed by Israeli forces. So the two main allies of al-Assad have been super weakened. Interesting, Phil, isn't it, though? If we were talking about this when Blair was in Number 10, you know that Blair would have a very significant role. Now, of course, that was hugely undermined by what happened in Iraq. The issue now, that if we look at what will the UK do, no one really cares, do they, what the UK does, because we don't have the same role that we had pre-Iraq in world diplomacy.
Are we outside the charmed circle now?
I do think we have a role to play. I think at a time when the US is going to change leadership, I actually think what's international relations scholars call middle powers actually have a role to play in bringing together coalitions to try and move a consensus forward. So she mentioned the UN resolution quite a lot, Angela Rayner. That's an example of middle powers engaging through a global forum. But I think, Trevor, it's also worth just mentioning the region itself. And, Kamal mentioned both Russia and Iran. I think the air cover from Russia had been a presence before they became very engaged in Ukraine. And so what you have in the region is a shadow war or a proxy war. And I think as you see the proxy that's not the right term, pull back because they have other things to do. I think that is actually why you see the movement of the opposition, because there is a hole here. But it does raise this question that if the shadow war and the proxy war in the region can have such pivotal moments, what else could there be?
OK, we're going to keep talking about this all morning and a lot to talk about. It is 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. There's significant breaking news from the Middle East this morning where Syrian rebels say they've captured the capital, Damascus, and ousted the Assad regime. The now apparently former president is reported to have fled the country. We've had immediate reaction from the government here. The Deputy Prime Minister has told this programme that she welcomes the fall of Assad. Angela Rayner said the situation was very serious and called for a political resolution. I can talk now to the former head of MI6, who's worked in Assad's Syria, Sir John Soares. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Trevor.
First of all, how much of a surprise do you think this was to us, particularly our intelligence services?
Well, I think it was a surprise to everyone, Trevor. It probably came as a surprise to Tahrir al-Sham, the group you're calling HTS, which have been the main rebel group involved in this march on Damascus. I don't think they expected to go so far, so fast. I think we're all surprised at how the regime forces have just completely collapsed, even those most loyal to the regime and closest to the regime. So, yes, it is a surprise. It's not a failure of intelligence. It's a surprise to everyone.
Do you think that, what does it tell us about, we've just been discussing the Russians and also the Turks. Do you detect the hand of Turkey in this?
Well, Turkey certainly has a close interest in this. The Tahrir al-Sham isn't the group that was closest to the Turks in terms of cooperation and training and supply, but Turkey has a very close interest. I think things have moved in a very favourable direction for Turkey, and I think they will be the most interesting and influential country in the region now as the various opposition groups come together to try to have a consensus about how a new regime comes into play. It's encouraging, I think, that the outgoing Prime Minister has stayed behind to have some form of orderly transition of power. The rebel forces themselves do not seem to be seeking vengeance on any groups, although, of course, there will be some accounting for the terrible brutality of the Assad regime and the torture and murder of so many opposition figures. There's bound to be some settling of scores at some point.
I want to come back to ask you about the Russians in a second, but let's just stick with HTS for the moment. Phil Collins was saying here that, of course, we could, we are always optimistic about these things, but sometimes it turns out we've exchanged bad for worse. What's your estimate, I mean, from what we know of HTS? Do you believe the sort of transition from being an al-Qaeda affiliate into being what some people are calling a genuine liberation movement?
Well, I think Phil is right to be cautious about this. But when I was chief of MI6 10, 12 years ago, we looked at all these Syrian opposition groups and classified them into those that we could support and those who were beyond the pale and too close to al-Qaeda. And Tahrir al-Sham was definitely in the latter category. But I think Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, the leader, has made great efforts over the last 10 years to distance himself from those terrorist groups. And certainly the actions we've seen of Tahrir al-Sham over the last 2 weeks has been those of a liberation movement, not of a terrorist organization. And so I think the Home Secretary will be asking the MI5 and the Joint Terrorism Assessment Center for a review of the situation about Tahrir al-Sham and whether it should remain on the prescribed entity list. It would be rather ridiculous, actually, if we're unable to engage with the new leadership in Syria because of a prescription dating back 12 years.
So you would, had you still been in office, you would be advising, reach out?
Absolutely. There's a new reality in Syria now. We've seen the collapse of a brutal, terrible organization, regime that's been in power for over 50 years in Syria. I was living in Syria back in the 1980s and saw the regime oppression with my own eyes in places like Hama. And now the regime, which represented only a 15% minority sect within Syria, has gone. There will be a sense of celebration, euphoria, but a real hard task lies ahead now to try to pull the country together. And it doesn't have any tradition of democracy. These are armed groups that have come together, so it's not as if they're political groups, political units. But I think the Turks, as I say, will play a crucial role in trying to bring these various groupings together to form a single coherent new regime.
You sound very optimistic. I mean, can I just say the words Afghanistan, Iraq, and I guess Libya? Why would this be different?
I think the most apposite comparison is Libya, and that's a bad comparison, where the regime, the country has been divided between different groups with different foreign powers supporting and promoting the division of the country. Actually, it's very hard to people to understand how far Iraq has developed. Actually, Baghdad is a remarkable place these days for visitors who go there. It is the one country of the three that has recovered best from the collapse of the brutal regime before. Of course, Afghanistan has gone back to the brutality because of the rather inept withdrawal of the of US forces back in 2021. So why is this better? I think it's because, first of all, the majority of Syrians are Sunni, and they've been repressed for a very long time. I think there's a good opportunity for them to come together and have a new government, a new constitution, a new dispensation there. Yes, there will be a very difficult time ahead, and there could well be elements of the old regime, as we saw in Iraq in the 2000s, elements of the old regime that fighters will rearguard insurgency in the Alawite heartlands in the northwest of Syria. I hope that doesn't happen. And the Russians may have a role here. The Russians have you asked me about the Russians. They have a major naval base and intelligence collection base at Tartus on the Mediterranean coast of Syria. They will want to hold on to those facilities that they have there, which means they have to come to terms with the new group, new powers in Syria. But of course, they've been instrumental in keeping the repressive Assad regime in power. So we're at a situation where the collapse of this brutal regime is really welcome, as Angela Rayner has said. But there is a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability ahead. I don't deny that at all.
The whole of this region, of course, is notorious for, if you like, external interference and involvement. And there are the other two big players here, aren't they? And I wonder what you think they are going to be thinking this morning. One, Iran, and the other, Israel.
I think Iran will be watching this with great nervousness, great anxiety. The events of the last week or so in Syria are exactly what the Iranian regime fear could happen in Iran at some point. I think they are more sophisticated in Iran. They've got some institutions of their regime, but it is still a minority regime with limited consent from the Iranian people, as we've seen at numerous times over the last 30 years when there have been opposition, protests and unrest against the regime. So the Iranians seem to be pulling back. They've been weakened by Israeli airstrikes around their main nuclear facilities, not on the facilities themselves, but taking out the air defense units around them. So I think they're feeling vulnerable, Iran. I think it very unlikely they're going to play an assertive role. And I'm quite encouraged by the fact that the Iranians do seem to be willing to re-engage with Europeans, with Americans, and to see if there is a future arrangement between Iran and the West, which meets our fundamental security requirements about their nuclear weapons program, about their support for militias in the region and so on. For Israel...
Sorry, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, well, for Israel, they're watching this carefully. After the 1973 war, when Israel occupied the Golan Heights, part of Syrian territory, that's actually been quite quiet. One of the good things for Israel in the last 50 years is that they haven't had problems on their border with Syria. They will be nervous about this. They've had a sort of implicit understanding with the Russians that the Russians would help ensure that the Syrian regime would prevent attacks across the Golan Heights from Syria, and in return, the Israelis have done nothing to undermine the Syrian regime. It's a sort of dirty, unwritten deal between Israel and Russia. But the Israelis now will be watching with great uncertainty about what's happening, and they'll probably be planning what Phil Collins was describing, which is a worst-case scenario of this going badly wrong and Syria breaking up into smaller units with armed groups who could well turn their fire on Israel at some point. I think that's less likely at the moment, but it's certainly not impossible, and the Israelis will be watching this very carefully indeed. I think the Israelis are going to have to come to terms with Turkey on this, because Turkey is going to be the main power broker.
John Soares, thank you very much, as always. Incredible clarity.
Thank you, Trevor.
Back to our panel, Kamal Ahmed, Linda Yueh and Phil Collins. Phil, great dissection there by John Soares. And it's really interesting, the point I guess I always make here, it's hard for us to realise how small this area is. You mentioned the Golan Heights. If you go up on the Golan Heights, you can pretty much see the whole of Israel, which, of course, from Israel's point of view, means that somebody on the Golan Heights can turn a gun on anywhere in Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a fascinating interview. And the thing that struck me, for one of many things, but one thing John was saying there was that the parallel with Iraq is one we should be very careful about. The parallels are probably not very great. Iraq, of course, hangs a great shadow over British foreign policy for obvious reasons. But there's one lesson I think we might take from the Iraq episode, which was the capacity of the state subsequently was very badly eroded. The de-Baathification, as they called it, meant that state institutions didn't function. One of my worries about the aftermath here is that this is a very divided country, politically and ideologically, and geographically too. And I worry about state capacity. Yeah. I worry about the institutions.
Kamal, just last one on Iraq. What's your judgment about what should our body language be here?
I think it's to Phil's point, it's about supporting the building of institutions. I mean, Linda, of course, mentioned that the US see Tahrir al-Sham as a terrorist organisation. So does the United Nations. How do Western powers, whether that's the UK, the European Union, America, although we know that America under Trump is going to be much more focused on China and Asia than it is on the Middle East, how do we help them build capacity so that the hollowed-out state, which we've had under Bashar, what you remember, Trevor, actually back to is when in Romania, Ceausescu was overthrown because the people had not only a repressive regime, but no economic functioning, and they had poverty and brutality. Swept aside, then democracy came to Romania. How can we support the building of institutions? Must be statecraft, has to be what we can help with as the middle power that Linda spoke about.
All right, let's turn to our own institutions, Linda. Government central thing is growth now, economic growth, and Angela Rayner is a key figure in that. The planning issue has become a problem. She's telling me this morning that the newts and the kittiwakes and the bats need to start packing their bags because she is going to cut through all of that. You believe it?
We're focused on being optimistic this morning. I do think if you want someone to deliver something, you have to have a target. But the question that you asked her, the conversation, is absolutely the key one, which is how do you move from NIMBYism to YIMBYism, which is the term that the Prime Minister has
Yes,
used.
in my backyard.
Exactly. And it's just not clear how that actually works. So, I mean, you set this target, 1.5 million houses. If you look at what the previous plans were, the OBR thinks is actually 1.3 million, just under the current target. So it is a little bit more ambitious. But the reason the targets keep getting missed is because it's so decentralized. So if you have a council that says, oh, you wanted 100, we can only give you 75, your question is the right one, which is what happens after that?
Well, I think I answered that 97 times.
Yes, and you know, what I've heard from local councils on this issue is that they'll say, it's not us, it's the developers. So in other words, we want to do it, but the developers won't come through. And to me, that is the fundamental reason why we're not building enough houses.
If in the end they're serious about streamlining the planning service, to use their own vernacular, the answer to your question in the end will be yes, we will make them do so. Because this conflict is coming. I've got a lot of sympathy with Angela Rayner. Of course, she wants to balance the desire for local consultation and conversations with the desire to get things done. But when they come into conflict, which, as you kept asking her, and they will, then there is a choice to be made. And if they're serious about it, which eventually I think they will be, because I think they're hanging so much on the reform of the planning system as the proxy for growth and then increased living standards, that I don't think they'll have any other choice other than to intervene, to say, no, you must.
But they're going to have to intervene with Labour councils and that huge number, but like 100 or so, Labour MPs who now represent rural constituencies.
Yeah, I think, Joe, there's a huge political problem which you identified and Angela Rayner struggled to answer. But I think, Linda, to your point, there's a huge systems problem, which is lack of construction workers. Yeah. House building, actually, there were some figures came out.
The training board says we're short 250,000 construction workers.
Figures came out on Friday saying that activity in the housing sector in the UK was actually going backwards because if there is not enough profit in house building because the government is demanding, quite rightly, that there must be social housing, there must be housing that is available for people who cannot afford to purely buy through private mortgages, then they will not make as big profits. Their shareholders say, well, if there aren't as big margins, we're going to pull down the number of houses we are building. There is always, and Phil, you've been inside government, I'd be fascinated in your answer to this, there's always this rather charming idea that Angela Rayner says, we will do this, and the system goes, yes, we will, and they all get on with it. Yeah. As Tony Blair found, and David Cameron and Gordon Brown, who all said the same thing, the scars on my back, the system doesn't deliver what politicians imagine it will.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. There's many other reasons why a policy might fail apart from the command of the centre. Absolutely right. I remember lots of instances. I remember once Tony Blair, like years after Job Centre Plus, complaining he had to go to the launch of one. So didn't we do that years ago? But no, Prime Minister, it's only just started. And you're quite right. There's a system... it's not just recalcitrant councils that will mean this policy might fall by the wayside.
And one
There's
minute,
a structural, serious deficiency.
1 minute, Keir Starmer's talking about civil servants in the tepid bath of managed decline, and the next minute they're demanding that they do this moonshot of building housing that's never been seen since the 1950s. I mean, Linda, from an economics point of view, you must look at that and think, I can't see how they're going to be able to hit this target.
Well, I know that economics is described as the dismal science, so I'm an economist. I'm in the wrong profession because I do actually think having the way she described it. So the problem with planning, as we all know, is very local. So a national plan that coordinates is actually the right approach. You have to nationalize local, okay, I'm not saying that.
But then you've got to be ready to tell them what to do, right?
Yeah, but you do have to. How do you enforce it? And there's a huge, to me, that's the.
Well, you do what the French do, don't you? You turn up with a huge bag of money and you say, there you go.
OK, that might be one of the economic constraints here.
Have you heard the word 22 billion black hole?
Yeah.
There's the other side of this, which, I mean, I wasn't trying to be clever about this, but it is a big problem for them that actually, OK, we're going to build these houses. Of course, they've never managed to hit the target, but let's say they do hit the target. Who get the houses? They're at least going to have to bring in some people from elsewhere, because they can't train all the craftsmen and craftspeople and all that in the next 2 years. They're going to have to bring people in from elsewhere. So you build these houses, more than half of them at the moment would be occupied by migrants. Is that the reason that we don't have a migration milestone? Because actually they've now created a sort of knot for themselves, which is almost impossible to get out of. You've got to have more people coming in to create growth, but you don't want more people coming in because you want immigration numbers down.
Yeah, that's very difficult. And my own view is they're going to have to change that conversation. I think you can go back to the public and say the migration that we are sponsoring is economically good for us. We're doing it because it's leading to growth with all these attendant benefits for the native population, and there will be no alternative but to go back and have that. In the speech that the Prime Minister gave, it was notable, wasn't it, that reducing immigration was one of the early priorities in the speech, but then it wasn't one of the featured milestones, and that was a peculiarity, isn't it?
I want to talk more about this, the speech later on, because that's always entertaining, talking about politicians' speeches. But we'll take a break now. After that, I'm going to speak live to the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, fresh from taking part in a crucial NATO meeting this week.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot, by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Yeah.
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Well, we were expecting to talk to my next guest about Ukraine and NATO, but as you can imagine, events in Syria have overtaken that this morning. But I can now speak to the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis. Now, Your reaction to what's happened overnight in Syria?
Well, it wasn't a surprise for this night.
Oh, really?
Yeah, of course. Watching how fast the opposition groups have moved during the last couple of days, it was rather clear that the regime might fall. How, when exactly, I mean, that has remained a mystery, but it's not a very big mystery, honestly. It was clear that there is a downfall incoming. And, looking at the wider geopolitical picture, also it was rather clear that there is a vacuum. There's a paradigm in geopolitics that no vacuum remains
unfilled.
Yeah, exactly. So, Russians are busy fighting the war in Ukraine. Israel, attacking terrorist groups also, increased that vacuum, and the opportunity was used by the opposition rebel forces that threw out Assad's regime. So, I mean, in theory, it all sounds logical. The only question remains: so what to make of it? And what is the path going forward?
So actually, that's interesting. So essentially, you think that number one, the Israelis' weakening of Hezbollah and so on open the door. The Russians' preoccupation with Ukraine had left Assad essentially to the mercies of his own people, and this is the result. The Pentagon's saying this morning that it worries now that ISIS may walk through that door as well.
There is such possibility, clearly, but I have a sense that there are regional actors that are gaining momentum as well. So one of them is Israel, clearly creating for itself way larger operational space than it has had in the past. I would assume that they will be keeping check on what is happening in their neighborhood, so that it doesn't change their security situation. And also one additional regional player that has been growing muscle for quite a while is Turkey. I think that we cannot be sure, obviously, about their involvement, direct or indirect.
It was striking that Mr. Erdogan, their president, was the first leader out there saying everything's changed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that they're also seeing the map and how does it play for their advantage. We have sensed that Turkey has an interest to be seen as a real regional partner that it would stretch its influence to Northern Africa, obviously Middle East, even to the Gulf and Caucasus countries. So I think that there is, we are at the point of seeing a little bit of that, I think.
As a NATO foreign minister, of course, your principal preoccupation recently has, of course, been the situation in Ukraine. Now, Mr. Zelensky told Sky News last week that he was open to negotiations with the Kremlin, provided he had security guarantees from NATO. In your view, is that a realistic prospect?
Security guarantees?
Yes.
Well, I would... my point is that I don't see any other way. Honestly, at this stage, there are certain preconditions that would need to be met in order, if Western allies supporting Ukraine believe that there is a way out of the war. So one is putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position, which it currently isn't, and securing Ukraine's future, so to say. And that for that to happen, you need to say to Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian businesses and politicians that, look, we have your back. You won't be attacked the way that you have been in 2014, in 2022. So there is no third act.
You've just come back from a NATO foreign ministers meeting, I think. Is there appetite for that amongst other NATO countries?
I would say that there's an illusion that there's a way to secure peace and, don't have these options on the table. And my goal when I go to meetings like the one that I had in Brussels, is to use the momentum and shatter those illusions to the best of my ability.
Oh, you think some of your colleagues are being a bit unrealistic and maybe naive?
Yeah, I think so. Because we have a very short historic memory, right? We're walking in exactly the same situation as we have been with Minsk I and Minsk II agreements after the 2014 aggression. And now somehow we think that this time is different. It's not. Russia is the same. It actually, you know, with Syrian news, it clearly shows that it can be beaten. It can be thrown out if we put our, you know, foot on the pedal. That is clear to me. So going back, you know, to 2014, repeating exactly the same mistakes that we have done in the past would set us for a new Russian aggression, maybe in Ukraine, maybe somewhere else. So I think that now it's not just about Ukraine, and I want to stress this, and Syria clearly shows this. It's about how do we limit Russia's operational space in, you know, in the wider region. You know, we're seeing what's happening in Georgia. You know, it's a country that is actually on the crossroad, choosing between Russia and Europe. You know, Western Alliance or Russian Empire. So we have ability now to stop Russia's influence in Georgia, in Moldova, in Romania, which is an EU and NATO ally, right? Fighting off.
What did for example, the Italians and the Germans say when you put this view forward?
Well, you know, 3 years ago, when the war broke out, there was a saying, we should have listened to the Baltics, right? That was a short-lived advice.
I see, okay. They were a bit sceptical. In your mind then, what would such security guarantees for Zelensky or for Ukraine look like?
Look, you know, when I'm talking about security guarantees, the only ones that I know that work are Article 5. Article 5 secured Europe's peace.
If you aggress this country, then you aggress us all.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because
all for one for all for one.
Because it's about the continent. You know, we are unable to have an insecure Ukraine and secure Poland or Lithuania. So we're connected already, right? So, I mean, it just makes sense. You know, theoretically, one could say, okay, so how do you actually practically ensure that Article 5 works, right? So that Putin is not tempted to test it and break NATO. I would say that, you know, in some sort of future, we have to start thinking about the defense plans of Ukraine, the NATO defense plans of Ukraine, maybe stationing, you know, tripwire troops in Ukraine, such as, you know, like we had in Lithuania or Poland, where we had, you know, a German battalion and then now brigade. So that has to happen. That we have to start thinking about these things in Ukraine.
Briefly, this is your last week in office. Is Europe a more dangerous place now than when you started?
It is, unfortunately. It is. We show that we have an ability to get our act together. You know, we have strength, but we're not fully yet there yet.
Mr. Landsbergis, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Next, I'll speak live to Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Let's get some more reaction to this morning's rapidly developing event from the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, who is currently on a visit to Bahrain. Good morning, Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Morning, Trevor.
You're there with a lot of other foreign policy bigwigs. What's the take out there on what's happened overnight?
Well, I think, first of all, how quickly events have moved. Now, I'm here at a strategic security dialogue, a conference and a forum with others. And over the last few days, there's been much discussion about what has been going on in Syria and obviously some of the key players. But the reality is overnight, things have moved very, very quickly. And of course, that means that we all need to be watching the current situation very carefully. I think there is a degree of, similar thought here, that it's too early to know how this is going to pan out. But ultimately, Trevor, this is about the Syrian people. Syrians need to be protected, all communities and groups, including all minorities. So we all need to look very carefully about how we respond. And certainly from the perspective of this region, as ever, it's a case of how we work together to, I think, effectively try and influence the right kind of outcome, put the Syrian people first, but also look at the sort of governance structures that could occupy Syria going forward and what that means for us, not just abroad in this region, but actually for us domestically at home.
I'm imagining that you're sitting there with people from all around the globe, and they're all busy checking their phones every 5 minutes to see what's going on. Who's most anxious?
I think, first of all, there's a degree of anxiety across this region, full stop. Primarily because there are so many challenges that have affected this region. I think first and foremost, if we look at Syria and just look at some of the immediate neighbouring countries, they themselves have been under a great deal of pressure. I raised some of these points in Parliament just last week around drugs and ammunition that seem to be proliferating. I think the anxiety is very much as a case of we don't quite know the full extent of what's going on. There are wider questions, Trevor, even about Assad's regime, his weapon stocks and supplies, what could go on and happen on the ground, which comes back to my point about the protection of the Syrian people and minority groups. I think realistically, we have a responsibility with our friends and allies and close partners in this region to look at how we can structure with Syria now a potential peace plan, but taking into account the new realities, particularly of this group, HTS, which is a proscribed organisation. And there'll be certain things that I'm sure our government back home will be doing through our security and intelligence network. And in terms of the people that I'm with right now, there are many security and intelligence operatives here who are having those conversations and discussions. So, like I said, this is a move-in issue. There'll be an element of fog of war. There's a lot of information that, we don't actually know about, but obviously some of this will already be within the intelligence frameworks.
You raised the point of HTS's proscription. We talked to John Soares a little while ago, and he was, I think, suggesting that, frankly, realistically, continued proscription of this organisation isn't the way to go. Would you agree with that?
I'm sure the government will have to look at all of this. I can't sit here and talk about an organisation that was prescribed many, many years ago. What I would suggest, Trevor, and I would have the confidence of the government doing this through our intelligence and security systems, that there will be a cross-government review and a coordinated review of the security and defence implications, as well as the terrorist risks, including some of the wider issues around this organisation. They will have to now assess the threat that HTS poses immediately for our own interests, as well as for Syria's interests and the wider region. Because as you've said, and I've touched on, this is a prescribed organisation. So we'll need to look at this, effectively run a very, very thick slide rule over all the implications. That's the right thing to do. I don't think we can speculate right now on any of this, Trevor. It's too early, but we need our people back at home to do all the risk assessments and work out where we stand with them and what this actually means for Syria in the short and medium term.
Can I just quickly return to a point which you made in passing, which is about Syria's or Mr. Assad's stockpile of weaponry? And I suspect you're talking not just about conventional guns, but perhaps some kind of weaponry, chemical weapons and so forth. Is that something that worries you?
Of course it does. We've had, over the last decade, this war has been going on for over a decade. We know of the number of casualties. We've seen the atrocities and the barbarity that's taken place under Assad's regime. We've discussed this in Parliament. We've had votes in Parliament and we've seen the history of Assad's regime. I think it's right and a legitimate question that we should, again, ask our intelligence networks to be looking at. This comes back to ultimately protection of the Syrian people, but also the minorities within Syria and other groups. So I think these are live concerns and legitimate issues. And I can certainly say that, I would be wanting to discuss much of this with the government going forward and looking at how we can be a constructive voice on this issue, but other issues around Syria's future and its future constitution and the composition of its future government.
Of course, there's a set of wider implications for the region. How do you read it? Stronger Turkey, maybe Russian withdrawal, who knows, from Iran? What's your take?
I think, first of all, there's clearly an element of the Turkish footprint is relevant here. It really is. I've been here at a discussion, a dialogue where Turkey have been actively speaking, representatives from the Turkish government, they've been actively speaking about what is going on in Syria. So there's no question that they have equities here and they're going to be a voice in all of this.
Do you think they knew? Did you think they knew what was going to happen?
Well, I can't speculate on that. They're closer to it, and obviously they'll have access to all sorts of reports and information that I suspect we don't even know about. On the Russian side of this conflict, it's clear that they have been consumed with Ukraine, and the fact that we've seen such fast movement, obviously in Syria around Damascus so quickly, tells us something, obviously, about they've scaled back. The reality is, though, Trevor, we have the long-standing issue of Iran, Iranian proxies, Iranian influence across the region. And this is a long-standing challenge for all of us. And I think certainly in this part of the world, and also from a UK perspective, we have to work incredibly hard now to try and address some of these wider challenges. And of course, we can't do this ourselves. We'll do this with our allies and friends in this region, but also we will be looking very clearly to America going forward as we move into the new year too.
And lastly, Israel. There are two ways of reading the situation for Israel, that actually they've weakened the Iranian proxies, the Hezbollah and so on, and that's partly what's led to this situation. And the other, which is now there are people potentially who will, in a sense, be more of a threat to Israel than Assad was. How do you read it?
Well, I think it's too early. Like I said, I don't want to be speculating on anything right now. The reality is we know of Israel and the way in which they have been targeting Iran and the direct attacks, particularly around Hezbollah. The reality is right now we are going to have to work with the information that becomes public and obviously is shared through the security networks as well. We need to just watch this situation carefully. Ensure actually that we put the Syrian people first, protect all the key groups and interests. And as I've said, I think Britain has a role to play. We've just chaired the Security Council. We've been a strong voice there. We can certainly be a positive and constructive influence through our intelligence and information, but some of the structures and the way in which we've conducted ourselves around Syria and stood up for the Syrian people over the last decade. And I think that absolutely remains.
Priti Patel, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And in just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
The referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Day of this conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Back to our panel, Kamal, Ahmed, Philip Collins, Linda Yueh. Now, Phil, you have a special place in political world because you are a speechwriter, the speechwriter, and you take these speeches and disentangle them and do this thing where you go, this is what he said, is that what he meant? What did you make of the milestone speech?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of the milestones and the missions of the foundations and the slightly tangled syntax of all of that, and I think those criticisms are fair. But I thought, if we think, well, what was he trying to do? I think he was trying to do something rather more interesting than merely relaunch the government, which is the frame it's been set in. He was trying to define things on which we should judge the government. He was trying to say, these are the things on which you can hold us to account in time to come. And inevitably, they are going to be a little bit small, and inevitably, you could say they're the wrong things. But that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to set out a few things on which we can say, if that has not hit that number a few years hence, then you have failed. And that task is one that is quite a necessary thing for government to do, because what lies behind that is the feeling that these days the bargain of government isn't working. The government isn't doing things for you. Government isn't working to help people anymore. They're trying to define particular things on which we can say, and therefore we have achieved.
Was it convincing?
Not wholly. not wholly, because when you reduce a speech to the transactional elements like that, the thing that is lacking is the overall drama, the overall story, and I think that perhaps that still is lacking. The sense what you really want to do in a speech is not just merely say we'll hit 92% of X, where those numbers don't mean much to individual people. You want to dramatise how the world will feel better, and I don't think it did that.
Full disclosure: from time to time, when I used to do another job, Kamal wrote one or two orations for me.
That's why you were so good, Trevor.
I think Phil, makes the really strong point is to be defined as a great prime minister, you need to be able to very simply say what they are for or what are they doing. And I was talking about this with a few friends last night. So if you think about Margaret Thatcher, what was she there for? She was there not to be the 1970s. That was her basic offer to the public was, we've had the 1970s, and I'm not going to let that happen again. If you think of Tony Blair, what was he there for? He was there, modernisation. Whatever that meant, whatever you agreed or disagreed with, the public could kind of see a thing when they thought of Tony Blair. The problem that Keir Starmer has, which I don't think this speech solved, is that single definitional phrase that the public can kind of hang on to, because you're absolutely right, Phil. The public, when it gets down to figures, they're quite quickly, it just becomes a white noise, and they can't remember the numbers. They do want public services to be better, and they do want to feel better off. Interestingly, it's not about household income. It's about much more basic things. Are my bills going down? And that type of thing is not only in the gift of government, that is in the gift of markets. And I think the biggest problem that Keir Starmer has, he hasn't linked the government's actions with how we can free enterprise to make this country work better.
The Economist, this is the invitation with The Economist. How does he do that?
I think I completely agree, he needs a story. So every great leader, in many ways, tells you why they're like you. So Margaret Thatcher, strength. Obama, hope. Tony Blair, new. This actually isn't coming from me. It's actually coming from things that I'm reading around how is it that you can...
I must say, that's right. I wish you thought... I bet you wish you thought of that.
I will, Trevor, I will.
So what he did on economic growth was really interesting because he took away being the fastest growing economy, but he replaced it with something which would matter more to people. And I completely agree with the idea that numbers without context don't mean anything. 75%, 92%, the best, it doesn't matter if you're top, if I don't feel better. And to feel better off, you need a range of things around standard of living. You need housing that we've discussed. You do need better education. You need social care. You need access to health. And so I think by framing it around improving standards of living, they've given themselves quite a hard task, even without a number. Because we know standards of living are just struggling if you look at per capita income. But I think it's actually the right approach because what Keir Starmer and the government needs to do is to define themselves by a word that captures why people voted for them, that they have this belief that things will be better in 5 years.
Let me pick up something you said, Phil, that they're small things. I mean, you could have a narrative that says, actually, we're the government of small things, and we're not going to do big narratives because they've all failed, and we're going to do incremental, like Dave Brailsford and the Sky team did the cycling. But there's I think there's a bigger issue here. What was missing? Now, I've already talked to Rayner about migration. Nothing to say about that, though Pat McFadden promised me last week when he was on the show there'd be some big thing about migration. The answer was, we want less of it, but no target. And the other thing, which I didn't hear anything about, social care. Single biggest unsolved problem. Isn't the issue here less that there are more or less convincing small targets, but the things that are actually in people's minds that will make a difference just didn't appear in this list?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think the problem, I think, with, this is really your area, Phil, messaging, is that government does a whole slew of things. So is there an argument, instead of being transactional by saying these are the 6 things and these are some of the targets, maybe do it in buckets? So not just healthcare, but actually care in general, social care. How can we have an honest conversation about how we need to fund ourselves? On migration, it should, lots of things are linked to house building. We've discussed it already. I think all of these things, if you did it as themes, that might be one way. But the problem with theme is how you communicate it, because then it just sounds like lots and lots of things. But what are you actually going to deliver? How do you hold government to account? Why should you vote for us?
Can I just take issue with the idea that they're small? I'm not sure they are small. I mean, you opened this programme by saying to Angela Rayner, your target of 1.5 million homes is in fact incredibly big. If you're Wes Streeting looking at trying to get 92% of people through the system in 18 weeks, that's a long way away. That is a difficult problem. So I don't think they're intrinsically small. I think the way they were presented made them seem small.
Oh.
I think you could have told the story of those things as not... Obviously, the whole NHS is not fixed if you just do that one thing. But that as a representative sample of a drama you're telling about improvement, I don't think it's small intrinsically. It's just the way that they were not threaded together, I think made it seem smaller.
I think, Trevor, you make a really strong point is around, on immigration, they are going to really struggle because they don't have solutions that are any different from the failed solutions of the previous Conservative government. I'm slightly more relaxed around social care and the National Health Service. In Wes Streeting, they do have a communicator, and Wes Streeting has certainly already put in place that it is the Department of Health and Social Care. Certainly the first 3 months of next year, you can see how the government can solve the issue of how do we put together some form of new system for social care, which means it actually works for people. So I feel less nervous about that. I think the big missing ticket, the Prime Minister has to be bigger in terms of the message.
Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. That is it from us for this week. I'm going to be back next Sunday morning. Watch Sophie all this week at 7 o'clock every evening.